He didn't choose his victims because he knew them. He chose them because they didn't know him. Late at night, while the world was asleep, he walked through quiet neighborhoods, moving past apartment complexes, scanning windows, observing lights going off one by one. Watching, waiting, hunting. He wasn't looking for a specific person. He was looking for an opportunity. Someone alone. Someone unaware. Someone who believed they were safe. And once he found that person, he didn't rush. He studied them. For days, sometimes weeks. Learning their routines, their habits, their patterns. When they came home. When they slept. When their lights turned off. By the time he made his move, he already knew their home better than they did. And that made him extremely difficult to detect. Because to everyone else, he looked like just another person walking down the street. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. But in reality, he was observing everything. "I had no idea," one victim would later say. "No idea someone was watching me." For most people, danger feels distant. Like something that happens to someone else, somewhere else. Not in your home. Not in your bedroom. Not in the middle of the night. But for one woman, that illusion would completely disappear. It was just after midnight in a quiet residential neighborhood. A 65-year-old grandmother, let's call her Mary, was asleep in her bed. The house was still. Silent. Ordinary. Nothing seemed out of place. Except for one small detail. A window that had been left slightly open. It was the kind of thing anyone could forget. Something that didn't seem important at the time. But someone had noticed it. Someone who had been watching. He had already chosen her. He knew she lived alone. He knew her daily routine. He knew when her lights turned off at night. And that night, he decided to act. He approached the house quietly and made his way to that open window. Carefully. Deliberately. Without making any noise. Then he climbed inside. Once inside, he moved through the house in silence, navigating the dark hallway until he reached the bedroom. Mary was still asleep, completely unaware that a stranger had entered her home, standing just a few feet away from her bed. And then she woke up. In an instant, everything changed. She felt weight on her body. A presence she didn't recognize. A man wearing a mask. She couldn't see his face, only his eyes. And in that moment, fear took over completely. She screamed. But he immediately reacted, telling her to be quiet. Over and over again. His voice was controlled. Commanding. He told her he had a weapon. And that if she didn't stay silent, he would kill her. In situations like this, people react differently. Some freeze. Some panic. Some resist. Mary did what she could to survive. She complied. For the next several hours, she lived moment to moment, following every instruction he gave her. Because at that point, survival was the only thing that mattered. But this wasn't just a random attack. It was structured, controlled, methodical. He told her exactly what he wanted, and he carried it out without hesitation. His behavior suggested experience, not randomness, as if this was something he had done before. And then, when he was finished, something even more disturbing happened. He pulled out a camera and began taking photographs. Not quickly, but deliberately, as if documenting the moment. Before leaving, he gave her a warning. If she contacted the police, if she told anyone, he would release those images. That threat was enough to silence her. But he didn't stop there. He began cleaning the scene, carefully removing anything that could contain evidence. Bed sheets, clothing, any surface that might hold trace material. Everything was handled with precision. It was clear he understood how investigations worked, and he was trying to eliminate any chance of being identified. After that, he led her into the bathroom and instructed her to fill the bathtub. At that moment, Mary believed she might not survive. She thought he was going to kill her there. But instead, he gave her one final instruction. Stay in the tub. Do not come out. Do not move. And then he left. Mary remained in that bathtub for over an hour. cold, terrified, completely alone, waiting for silence, waiting for confirmation that he was gone. For investigators, the scene told a story immediately. This was not random. It was controlled, intentional, experienced. They processed the home carefully, searching for anything that could identify the attacker. And eventually, they found a small piece of biological evidence, a trace that could potentially link the suspect to a database. It was sent for testing. But when the results came back, there was no match, no known identity, no record. The case quickly became difficult. Without a suspect, without a match, and without additional leads, the investigation slowed. And eventually, it went cold. But while the case remained unresolved, the person responsible was still out there, still operating, still watching, still searching for the next opportunity. And it wouldn't be long before he struck again. After the first case went cold, life in that neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Police had no suspect to pursue, no clear identity, no immediate threat that could be publicly confirmed. And for the community, that created a dangerous sense of relief. People stopped locking their windows as carefully. They resumed their routines. They believed, once again, that their homes were safe. But the reality was very different. Because the person responsible had not disappeared. He had simply moved on, watching, waiting, learning, and refining his methods. The confidence he gained from the first incident only strengthened his behavior. He now understood how much control he had, how easily he could enter a home, how little resistance he might face, and most importantly, how difficult he was to trace. With no identification and no immediate leads, he continued operating in the same pattern. Late hours, quiet streets, careful observation. He would blend into environments without drawing attention. A passerby, a shadow, someone you wouldn't remember seeing. But he was always paying attention. He began to notice small details that others ignored. Which houses had security lights? Which homes had regular activity? Which individuals lived alone? He didn't rely on chance. He relied on information. And over time, that information allowed him to become more precise, more calculated, more confident. Then, another opportunity appeared. A different home, a different individual, but the same vulnerability. A woman living alone in a quiet area. Her daily routine was predictable. She left for work at the same time every morning, returned at the same time every evening, and followed a consistent pattern that made her movements easy to track. He observed her from a distance at first, not approaching, not interacting, just watching. For several days, he confirmed the routine. When she left, when she returned, when the house became completely empty, and once he had enough certainty, he began preparing. This time, he adjusted his approach slightly. He didn't rush the entry. He waited for a moment when the surroundings were at their quietest. No movement outside. No visible activity from nearby homes. Then he made his way toward the property. Again, using stealth and timing rather than force. He checked access points, doors, windows, potential entry routes. And once he identified a weak point, he took advantage of it. Inside the house, everything appeared normal. Furniture in place. Lights off. No immediate signs of disturbance. But for him, that environment meant opportunity. He moved carefully through the interior, minimizing noise and avoiding anything that could alert someone nearby. And once again, he made his way toward the sleeping area. At this point, the pattern was familiar. Approach quietly. Enter undetected. Confront the victim while they are asleep. The advantage was always on his side, because in these situations, the first moments determine everything. When the victim wakes up unexpectedly, confusion sets in. They don't immediately understand what is happening. Their reactions are instinctive, not calculated, and that brief window of confusion gives the attacker control, which is exactly what he relied on. Inside the bedroom, he positioned himself near the bed, waiting, and then the moment came. The victim began to wake. At first, there was disorientation, a sense that something wasn't right, a presence in the room that didn't belong, and then full awareness, fear, immediate and overwhelming. The victim attempted to react, but by then, he was already in control of the situation. As before, he used threats to establish dominance. His tone remained calm, measured, unemotional. He did not appear rushed. He did not panic. He instructed the victim to remain still, to comply. And under the pressure of the situation, compliance became the safest option available. What followed mirrored elements of his previous encounter. Structured interaction, controlled movement, clear instructions. Everything was directed by him, and everything was done in a way that minimized risk on his side. But unlike the first case, small differences began to emerge in how he operated. Subtle adjustments, changes in timing, variations in behavior, minor differences in execution. To an untrained observer, these details would mean nothing. But to investigators later, they would become important. Because patterns, even small ones, can reveal connections. At the time, however, there was no immediate link between incidents. No confirmed suspect. No public warning connecting the cases. Each event appeared isolated, and that allowed him to continue without drawing attention to a larger pattern. After completing his actions, he once again took steps to remove traces, minimizing evidence, avoiding identifiable marks, leaving behind as little as possible. Then he exited the property the same way he entered, quietly, without detection. From the outside, the house remained undisturbed. No signs of forced entry that were immediately obvious. No visible damage that would alert neighbors. Just another quiet night in a quiet neighborhood. But inside, everything had changed for the victim. And once again, the case would begin with confusion, limited evidence, and no clear suspect. For investigators, this second incident raised new concerns. Because while the first case could have been considered isolated, a second similar event suggested something more serious, something repeatable, something intentional. And if the pattern continued, it would only become harder to stop. The case they found had been sitting quietly in a file. Different label, different category. It wasn't even officially classified the same way. But when investigators looked closer, they realized something critical. This wasn't just another incident. It was a missed connection. It happened in another nearby city, late at night, just like the others. A woman was asleep when she heard something, a faint sound, coming from inside her home. At first, she wasn't sure what it was. But then she saw him, a large figure, standing in her doorway, masked, watching, waiting. He moved toward her quickly, climbed onto the bed, forced her down. Everything about it felt familiar. The same control, the same confidence, the same method. But this time, something was different. She fought back, not physically at first, but mentally. She spoke, loudly, firmly, telling him he wasn't supposed to be there, telling him this wasn't going to happen. And then, she did something unexpected. She started yelling a man's name, over and over again, as if someone else was in the house. That changed everything. For the first time, he hesitated, just for a second. But that second was enough. He got off the bed, went to check the room, and in that exact moment, she made a decision that would save her life. She ran, jumped onto the bed, and threw herself out the window. It wasn't a clean escape. The window was small. The fall was brutal. She hit the ground hard, shattering part of her spine, breaking ribs, collapsing a lung. But she didn't stop. Through the pain, through the shock, she got up, ran to a neighbor's house, and called for help. That moment changed the entire investigation, because for the first time, they had something real, something solid, something that connected everything. From that scene, investigators recovered critical evidence, a glove pattern, distinct, recognizable, a honeycomb design, and it matched something they had already seen. Then came the shoe print, the same brand, the same pattern, a direct match to the print found in another attack. Piece by piece, the puzzle started coming together. And then, one final detail, a vehicle, a white pickup truck, seen near the scene. That was the turning point, because now they had something they could trace. The task force went to work, digging through records, cross-checking sightings, looking for anything that matched. And then they found it. A report, a vehicle, a white Mazda pickup truck, seen in more than one location, more than one crime scene. That wasn't coincidence anymore. That was a lead. When they pulled records tied to that vehicle, a name came up, a man who had never been on their radar before. No violent criminal history, no obvious warning signs. On the surface, he looked completely normal. But when they looked closer, everything started to line up. His appearance matched the description. Height, build, hair. Even his background raised questions. Disciplined, trained, someone who understood structure, someone who could plan. Investigators knew they were close, but close wasn't enough. They needed proof, something undeniable. So they started watching him, carefully, quietly, tracking his movements, studying his routine, the same way he had studied his victims. And it didn't take long for things to get tense. One day, they saw the truck leave. Everything seemed normal, routine, nothing unusual. But at the same time, something didn't feel right, because when another agent approached the house and knocked on the door, someone answered. That wasn't supposed to happen. They believed he had just left, but now, someone identical was standing right in front of them. That's when they discovered something unexpected. He wasn't alone. He had a brother, and they looked almost exactly alike. Now the situation became more complicated, because the DNA they had could belong to either one. So they made a move. They collected a sample, quietly, carefully, from something as simple as a drinking cup. When the results came back, it confirmed one thing. The DNA belonged to that family. But which one? There was only one way to find out. Early one morning, they made their move, surrounding the house, closing in. When the door opened, they came face to face with him. And in that moment, everything became clear. They checked his leg, pulled up the fabric slightly, and there it was, the same distinctive mark, described by the victim. That was it. That was the confirmation they needed. He was placed under arrest, right there. No more guessing, no more waiting. But what they found next, inside that house, was even more disturbing. Because the truth was, this was bigger than anyone had imagined. When investigators entered the house, they already believed they had their man. But what they were about to find would take the case to another level. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. An ordinary home, ordinary rooms, ordinary life. But hidden inside was something far from ordinary. They started searching. Closets, drawers, shelves, and almost immediately they began finding items. Not random items, specific ones. Shoes, the exact brand, matching the prints found at multiple crime scenes. Gloves, with that same honeycomb pattern, linked directly to the attacks. And then, something even more chilling. A camera, a pink digital camera, the same one described by victims, the same one used during the assaults. It wasn't hidden, it wasn't buried, it was sitting out, as if it meant nothing. But the most disturbing discovery was still to come. Inside the house, they found storage devices, hard drives, and when they examined them, everything changed. There weren't just images of the victims they already knew. There were more, many more. Photographs of women in situations that looked exactly like the attacks. Terrified, controlled, powerless. Investigators were faced with a terrifying possibility. How many victims were there? And more importantly, were they all still alive? What had started as a series of attacks was now something much bigger, something darker, something that had been hidden for far too long. They began tracking down every lead, every face, every image, every possible victim, trying to separate what they knew from what they didn't. And for the victims, the impact didn't end with the arrest. For many of them, the fear stayed, the memories stayed, the feeling of being watched never fully disappeared. Because the hardest part wasn't just what happened that night, it was knowing how close it came to happening again, to someone else. Investigators later described him as calculated, disciplined, patient, someone who didn't act on impulse, but on planning. He didn't just commit crimes. He studied them, improved them, perfected them. And that's what made him so dangerous. But in the end, it wasn't his planning that defined him. It was his mistake. Because no matter how careful someone is, no matter how calculated they become, one detail, one moment, can change everything. A single survivor, a single clue, a single connection. That's all it took to stop him. And while justice doesn't erase what happened, it does one thing. It ends the cycle. Because that night, when he thought no one was watching, someone was. And this time, he was the one being hunted. As we reach the end of this case, one thing becomes clear. Some dangers don't announce themselves. They hide in plain sight, waiting quietly until it's too late to notice. This story is a reminder that awareness can make all the difference, and even the smallest details can sometimes determine survival. If you found this case intriguing, stay connected for more real-life mysteries, investigations, and untold stories. This is Dark Casebook, bringing you deeper into the shadows where the truth unfolds. Stay safe and stay aware.